Alright, this is going to be my review of the 1974 science fiction film Phase 4. This one was written by Mayo Simon, who also wrote 1969's Marooned, which had Gregory Peck, and he wrote a movie called Future World, 1976. This looks like a good one that I'd like to find and watch. Future World had Peter Fonda, another kind of science fiction type movie. It was directed, Phase 4 is directed by Saul Bass, who was not much known for his directing, but he was more of a graphic designer of things like title sequences and film posters and corporate logos and that kind of thing. There is some controversy with his directing. He claimed that he had a part in directing the famous scene in Psycho 1960, the Hitchcock film, the shower scene, which has been disputed by some of the actors, including Janet Leigh. So Phase 4 has not a big cast. It stars Michael Murphy. I would say he's kind of the main guy. Michael Murphy as James Lesko, and he wasn't in a whole lot of things that are well known. He was in Manhattan, 1979. I believe that is a Woody Allen film, and he was in a film called Nashville, 1975, which had some pretty big name actors in it, like Jeff Goldblum. And so he's one of the scientists, and then the other scientist is Nigel Davenport, who plays Ernest Hubbs. And he's he's got like this English accent. He's older. Nigel Davenport was in A Man for All Seasons, 1966, and Island of Dr. Moreau, 1977, and he was in Chariots of Fire, 1981. The young female in this, Kendra, is played by Lynn Frederick, who is not in the whole lot. She was best known as being the fourth and final wife of Peter Sellers. She was in The Amazing Mr. Blunden, 1972. It's probably like her best known film. And despite not being in a whole lot of things, she has since developed kind of a cult following. That's pretty much it for the cast. There's a couple others in this. Kendra's grandparents, Mr. Eldridge, Kendra Eldridge. So her grandparents, Mr. Eldridge, is played by Alan Gifford, who was in Dark of the Sun, 1968. He was also in 2001, A Space Odyssey. And the grandmother is played by Helen Horton, Miss Eldridge. She was in Alien, 1979. She was in Superman 3 also. So that's pretty much it for the cast. There's a couple others, but like a radio announcer, but not too important. So tagline is, suddenly desert ants form a group intelligence and wage war on the humans. Ants are pretty incredible, pretty amazing creatures. Like, they can do a lot of things. Like, they can wage war, they cultivate food crops, they can build, they practice slavery, they're able to communicate elaborately with instructions and stuff. So there's no surprise that like writers and film directors over the years have gone the route of, exploring ants and speculating, like, what might happen if some environmental change were to take place and put humans and ants in direct opposition with each other. So most of the time this means little more than making the ants big enough to pose a threat, such as the great James Whitmore 1954 film Them. But occasionally someone will try the more thoughtful approach to this, of leaving the ants at their natural size and giving them intelligence instead. And Phase 4 is a great example of this. So if you have like a short attention span, you might have a rough going of it to get through the 86 minutes of film time here, but anyone, people should enjoy, like, just you owe it to yourself to give it a look. So as this thing opens to some weird music and pretty cool little graphics of space, something strange is going on in outer space, and screenwriter Mayo Simon doesn't like go into detail as to what is happening, but the special effects that represent what's happening seem to show that there's some kind of combination of like solar flare activity and some kind of odd conjunction of like celestial bodies at play. And so regardless, scientists all over the world are certain that the big cosmic light show is going to have repercussions on Earth. And they just don't know what form they're going to take yet. In fact, even when the anticipated effect occurs, it nearly goes unnoticed because it happens to such a tiny, like, insignificant creature. So pretty much the only person who does notice it is Nigel Davenport's character, Ernest Hubbs, an entomologist, kind of a eccentric guy. He was also in No Blade of Grass, by the way. And the first signs may look innocuous to the layman, but Hobbs knows enough to be worried when he sees like ants of different species in Arizona that are usually antagonistic towards each other, but suddenly they're like cooperating with each other. So even those who are like less familiar with the ways of this breed of ants start to worry because creatures that prey on ants start to disappear, like big spiders and stuff. And they show this in detail, what happens to the spiders with the ants cooperating with each other. So these things like spiders and other even bigger animals start to disappear from the neighborhood, and before long, these ants start to make life so difficult for the ranchers, like cows are getting killed, that the government orders an evacuation of this region in Arizona, and the government also approves funding for Dr. Hubbs to set up this laboratory outside the desert with the whole purpose of trying to figure out just what has happened to the insects and then how they could go about stopping them. So here's the plan. Hobbs' laboratory consists of a small dome that's like located in the part of the desert where the changed ants have most recently like built these eerie skyscraper like towers, like these hive-like towers. And so the lab is protected, the dome thing is protected by this ring of massive sprinklers for like various types of like pesticide, very powerful pesticide. And they use this like orange pesticide that works really well. They have a lot of state-of-the-art stuff inside of the dome. It's not a big dome, but there isn't a lot of room for like habitation. So Hubbs employs one assistant. That's James Lesko, played by Michael Murphy. And interestingly enough, Lesko is not an entomologist like Hobbs. He's a scientist, but his training is in cryptology, which is code breaking. So he's going to study the actions in an effort to determine whether they have developed the ants have developed a true language. And so he has this computer thing that's showing him, it's going to hopefully show him like the language of the ants and like what they're saying to each other, and trying to figure that out, that kind of code breaking. So while his partner attacks the problem from a biological perspective, Nigel Davenport, if the ants are really talking to each other, it might be possible for the scientists to talk to them and figure out what's going on. Really weird. So like in order to get a completely free hand, Hobbs will need to make sure that everyone nearby really is evacuated like they were supposed to. So for the most part, all is well as far as people evacuating and following the government orders. But one family, that's the Eldridges that I mentioned, the two grandparents and their granddaughter, played by Lynn Frederick, they've like refused to or they didn't get the notice. So to some extent, this is to the scientists' advantage, because they head out to the farm and then they give the old man the orders, and by doing that, they get to like kind of interview them and see like what the people have seen as far as the ants in action. But what they learn is not good. The ants become such a danger that the Eldridge clan has felt compelled to surround the land with this like gasoline-filled ditch. And so the Eldridges are not happy to hear that they're ordered to evacuate. And for a moment, it looks like Mildred Eldridge, the grandmother, is about to get all the Montana Freemen on the scientists' tails. But the two scientists leave the farm, and after a short while, then they go back to their little to their dome lab. And so the biggest problem that confronts the two scientists is getting the ants they're supposed to be studying to do anything that's like worthy of studying. Because after most of the 2 weeks, there's still like not much sign of activity from those little from the little ants. And eventually, Hobbs gets kind of tired of waiting, and he steps outside the lab with his flare gun and just starts blowing up the big dome, the big ant houses, the they're like towers. He just like blows them to bits. And so they swarm against the lab by the millions in retaliation, and they're repelled only when Hobbs uses his pesticide spray. He turns on the pesticide sprayers, and that works for the time being. So not only that, the ants also launch an attack on the Eldridge farm before the family has a chance to get out of there. And so, through a stroke of luck so bad, it's that someone must be mad at them. The Eldridges flee to the Hobbs lab and make it there just in time to get hosed down with the bug spray, so they get killed by the bug spray themselves. Only Kendra, who had a good sense to seek shelter in the basement of one of the abandoned houses beside the lab building, is alive when Hobbs and Lesko go outside to see what happened the following morning. So the ants have a lot of tricks up their sleeves. And the advantage rapidly shifts to the ants. So by having the ant workers feeder, I had to switch there. By having the workers feeder, the queen is able to produce this new generation of ants, like working ants that are immune to so they create ants that are like immune to the pesticides. Not good for the scientists. So there's like the poison-proof ants spend the next night surrounding the lab with like small mounds where the surfaces have been polished to reflect its smoothness, and it's an Arizona desert. So when the sun comes up, Hobbs, Lesko, and Kendra find themselves in a remarkably effective solar-powered oven. So they're gonna cook the people with these smoothed out reflection, they make these solar power things, the ants do. So the scientists are able to destroy some of the reflector mounds with ultrasound, but the temperature within the lab continues to climb and climb above 90 degrees, and so that hurts the computer and the equipment and all that stuff. And so after Hobbs manages to get himself stung by one of the ants, Lesko may as well be on his own, because that's kind of like the death blow, because they're poison ants. And Lesko, the venom causes a high delirium fever and swelling and all this stuff. And so the older scientist who got bit dies just a few days later when he falls into the ant, an ant trap, and when he goes outside. So A lot of people will lump the Phase 4 in with like Mother Nature revenge movies that were being made roughly around the same time, but it was really more like late 70s, this is 74. But I don't think that's appropriate at all, because there's no revenge going on here. There's nothing, there's anything that would like allow a person to say that like we brought it on ourselves, and there isn't even any toxic waste lying around for the ants to eat. So what we're dealing with here is just an emergency, or like just the coming of a new species that's capable of like out-competing humans in the greatest struggle for survival. So for that reason, Phase 4 seems like much more serious and intelligent a movie than, say, like Frogs or Prophecy, Frogs is a great movie. I haven't seen Prophecy. The absence of much in the way of like showy special effects is another thing that's another big point in this movie's favor. There's not a whole lot of them, indicating, as it does director's Saul Bass's confidence that the screenplay he was working with was strong enough to stand on its own. At any rate, yeah, I think that's kind of how I see it. It's a big part of the reason that the short attention span crowds are going to be squirming uncomfortably during this movie in their seats after like the first half hour or hour. But if you're asking me, Phase 4 gets along just fine without much action. This is not an action-packed movie. The entire point here is that the challenge posed by the intelligent ants is one that can't really be met with firepower. This isn't war, but it's evolutionary change. So it's like modern man is so far removed from the days in which he existed at the same level as the rest of the biosphere that most of us have never stopped to consider what it would be like if we had meaningful ecological competition. So like by positioning a rival for humanity that is too small to be hunted, too adaptable to be poisoned out of existence, and at least potentially too ambiguous to be like quarantined, Phase 4 forces us to at least think about that. So meanwhile, the fact that it ends before the two species have come to grips with each other on a large scale leaves open all the questions that it raises. So we never get more than the vaguest hints of what the ants' agenda is, which is kind of cool, regarding humankind, nor is there any like conclusive answer forthcoming to the question of whether meaningful communication is possible between us and ants, humans and ants. So though the ants are apparently comparable to humans in terms of intelligence, the vast social and biological differences between the species might, come before communication, but the most concrete, tangible subjects. So it isn't even clear, like, whether all the ants in the change colonies are intelligent, or whether the queens are directing swarms of workers that are just mindless. There's no hint of that, but a lot of filmmakers seem to have lost track of this in recent decades. But there's a reason why it's the thin-skinned fans prefer to call science fiction by the rather more pretentious name of speculative fiction. It's supposed to make you think, okay? Phase 4 does make you think, and it's a hell of a lot more you could say for most movies made about killer bugs. The ending of this movie is awesome, but it's not like a satisfying ending. It kind of leaves you with just a lot of questions. It takes a lot of time to get through this. It takes a lot of viewings of this film to watch and try to figure out exactly what happens and what's going to happen in the future. It really sets up this like sequel, which no one bothered with, but it's cool, just stands on its own. Phase 4, 1974, one of my favorite science fiction films, not just of the 70s, but of all time. Worth many, many watches, because you have to think and you have to really put a lot of pieces together, and a lot of incredible shots of the ants. Very good job of shooting the ants and making them look scary and very intelligent. Alright, thanks for watching my review of Phase 4.